Hello, it's so good to have you here. Today we're going to dive into a truly inspiring story and uncover the 7 secrets that made Joshua an extraordinary leader. Secrets that can be applied to your life, your home, your work, your spiritual walk, or in any battle you face day by day. Most people know Joshua as the commander who brought down the walls of Jericho. But behind that image lies something much greater. Leadership secrets that transformed Joshua's life. And that can transform yours as well. In today's story, you'll see Joshua facing the crushing pressure of the majority, enduring the weight of waiting, walking in silence before insurmountable walls, and much more. Each scene is like a living portrait of what it means to trust God when everything around you screams the opposite. And in each moment, a secret emerges, a principle that separates an ordinary leader from an extraordinary one. And keep this in mind. The last secret in this list is unlike any of the others. It carries a revelation that almost no one knows. If you stay with me until the end, you'll see this story with new eyes and perhaps discover that the same God who guided Joshua is the one who desires to guide your life today. Shall we begin? The camp of Israel rested silently at the foot of Sinai. The tent stretched as far as the eye could see, dotted with lamps flickering in the cold desert night. The air still carried the distant echo of the day when the mountain had trembled at the voice of God. Among the murmurs of gathered families and the crackling of fires, a young man walked with steady steps. His eyes attentive were not fixed on men but on someone walking ahead of him, Moses, the deliverer of Israel. That young man was Joshua. From early on, Joshua had learned that leadership does not begin with titles, but with service. He did not seek applause nor a position of prominence. His greatest desire was to remain near the one whom God had chosen, to observe his gestures, to hear his words, and above all, to be in the presence of the prophet who was a friend of the living God and saw his face. Within Joshua there was a silent thirst to learn, as if each moment were preparation for something greater that he did not yet fully understand. Picture the scene, the moon illuminating the rocky slopes of Sinai, the wind whistling between the stones, and Moses climbing step by step to meet with the Most High. Joshua followed closely. He was not called to enter the interior of the cloud of glory, but remained in the shadow of that sacred moment, with his heart in reverence. Others returned to the camp, but he stayed. Others sought the comfort of the tents, but Joshua remained at the entrance of the tabernacle, guarding the place where the cloud of God descended. His devotion did not need an audience. It was enough for him to be where the presence of the Lord was manifested. There, in the stillness of waiting, in the silent hours when nothing seemed to happen, his character was being molded. How many of us would endure only observing, without recognition, without visible leadership, simply serving? Joshua learned that before commanding, one must know how to obey. Before governing, one must learn to serve. Before being heard, it is essential to learn to listen. The secret of Joshua's greatness was not in his warrior's muscles, nor in his skill with the sword. It was in the humility of one who knew how to remain in the shadow, understanding that even the shadow of a man of God is a place of light. He absorbed in silence the lessons that would make him an extraordinary leader. This detail is revealing. While Israel murmured in the desert, weary of the journey, longing to return to Egypt, Joshua stood firm, focused, desiring to enter the promised Canaan. While others gave in to doubt and anxiety, he fed himself on the faith that flowed from his fellowship with Moses and with God. He observed how the prophet fell to his knees in times of crisis, how he sought direction in prayer before each decision, how he bore the weight of guiding an entire nation, and silently, he learned. In the life of Joshua, we see something the modern world often ignores. Greatness is born in anonymity. Leadership is forged in the background. Those who wish to be extraordinary must be willing to start small, to serve without recognition, to remain faithful when no one else is watching. This is the first secret of Joshua's leadership, and perhaps the most forgotten today. How many times do we ourselves desire quick results, elevated positions, immediate recognition? But Joshua shows us that there is no shortcut. His preparation was long, discreet, and silent. While others sought fleeting honors, he sought to learn humility with God. This was his greatest school. This is the first secret that made Joshua an extraordinary leader. To learn before commanding, to serve before governing, to obey before being obeyed. He teaches us that the true power of a leader does not come from the position he occupies, but from the humility he carries. But Joshua's life would not remain only in this stage of learning. Soon another secret of his leadership would be tested, one of the most challenging of all. And what seemed like defeat was hiding the seed of victory. The desert sun burned relentlessly as the 12 spies returned from Canaan. The people ran to meet them, eager to hear news of the promised land. Upon their shoulders they carried a cluster of grapes so large that it took 2 men to bear it. They also brought figs and pomegranates, abundant signs of a fertile land. The eyes of all sparkled with expectation, but the atmosphere soon changed. One by one, 10 spies began to speak. Their voices, heavy with fear, described fortified cities, immense walls, giants of imposing stature. As their words echoed through the camp, hope turned into despair. Women wept, men murmured, children clung to their parents. The noise was deafening. A chorus of unbelief took hold of thousands of people. It was then that Joshua and Caleb rose to their feet. Their voices, firm and strong, tried to break through the avalanche of fear. The land is good. If the Lord delights in us, he will give us the victory, they insisted. Picture the scene. 2 men in the midst of an exalted crowd calling for silence, pointing to the promises of God while everyone around shouted the opposite. Their eyes shone with faith, but the majority did not want to listen. This was Joshua's second secret, the courage to remain on the side of the promise, even when everyone else chooses doubt. To lead is not to follow the voice of the majority, but to uphold the truth when it seems the whole world is against you. And here lies something even deeper. By faith, Joshua and Caleb deserved to enter Canaan immediately. They were ready, already at the edge of the promise. But God decided that Israel would return to the desert for 40 years, until the unbelieving generation was consumed. For many, that would have been a cause for revolt. For Joshua, it was an occasion for submission. He did not rebel, did not withdraw, did not give up. He accepted waiting for God's timing, even if it meant growing old under the desert sun, bearing the consequences of others' mistakes. Think of the pain of that waiting. For decades, Joshua saw friends, relatives, and traveling companions laid to rest. Each funeral was a reminder of a lost opportunity. Yet his faith did not die. While many murmured, he stood firm, obedient to divine guidance through Moses. This is the mark of an extraordinary leader, the ability to trust in God's direction, even when the path seems delayed, unjust, or painful. This secret speaks directly to our lives. How often do we feel ready to achieve something, but God calls us to wait? How often do we suffer from decisions that were not ours but affect us deeply? In such moments, the temptation is to complain, to give up, or to seek shortcuts. But Joshua shows us another way, to trust, even when God's clock seems slow. And so for 40 years, Joshua walked in silence, sustained by the certainty that the promise would still be fulfilled. His heart did not grow bitter. His faith did not fade. He knew that the word of the Lord never fails, even when it seems delayed. This is the second secret that made Joshua an extraordinary leader, the courage to accept submission to God's timing. He teaches us that true leadership is not only fighting giants, but also bearing the weight of waiting with confidence. But what no one imagined was about to happen. Leave a like so these teachings can reach more people. The desert was now behind them, but the dust of the long journey still seemed to cling to the soul of the people. 40 years of walking in circles, watching generations perish along the way, and at last they stood at the edge of the promised land. The Jordan roared ahead, swollen and rushing during harvest time. Behind them, the recent grief for Moses still weighed like a shadow over the camp. It was impossible not to feel his absence. Moses had been more than a leader. He had been a mediator, the voice that spoke with God face to face, the man whose presence made the people feel secure, a father. Now that responsibility rested on Joshua's shoulders, and as prepared as he had been, the weight seemed crushing. Picture Joshua walking alone through the camp in the silence of the night. The cold wind stirred the tents. Some lamps still flickered inside. He looked at each family, each sleeping child, each person still waiting for the promise. Everyone depended on him. And in his heart the question pressed, am I capable? The eyes that followed him were full of expectation. Many trusted him, remembering his courage when he spied out the land. Others perhaps observed in silence, comparing him to Moses, doubting whether he would measure up. Each look felt like an added weight upon his soul. The fear was not of fighting or facing enemies. Joshua already knew war. What frightened him was failing the people, failing God, not being enough. The memory of past rebellion still burned. He knew that leading was not just marching toward the land, but keeping the hearts of millions united in faith. That was the hardest battle. And it was at that moment of fragility that the voice of the Eternal came to him. It was not a human whisper, not the counsel of an elder, but the voice of God, clear, firm, piercing. Do not be afraid nor be dismayed, for the Lord your God is with you wherever you go. The words pierced his soul like blades of light. Imagine the impact, the silence of the night broken only by divine certainty. Joshua lifted his face, and it was as if the darkness around him lost its power. The weight did not vanish, but it was transformed. Fear still existed, but now it was enveloped by the presence of God. Each word was like fresh water to a thirsty heart. Do not be afraid, the antidote to insecurity. Nor be dismayed, the command against the surprise of obstacles. I am with you, the promise that made all the difference. Joshua might not know how to face the giants nor how to cross the Jordan, but he knew he would not be alone. The great I Am would go with him and before him in every battle and conquest. This is the third secret of his leadership. An extraordinary leader does not rely on his own ability, but on the promise and presence of God. The true power of Joshua was not in the sword, nor in his military experience, but in the conviction that the Lord marched ahead of him. Think for a moment. How many times have you also felt small before responsibility, a family to care for, decisions that seem too great, situations you don't know how to solve? In those moments, the same voice that spoke to Joshua still echoes. Do not be afraid. I am with you. That very morning, renewed by the promise, Joshua gathered the officers and gave the order. Prepare yourselves, for tomorrow the Lord will do wonders among you. He did not explain how. He gave no details, he simply declared faith. His eyes, once marked by doubt, now shone with the confidence of one who had heard the voice of God. The people watched him. Many perhaps thought, how can he be so sure? But Joshua's faith was unshakable. He did not need to know every step. It was enough to have the presence of the God who had spoken. That was the foundation of his courage. This is the third secret that made Joshua an extraordinary leader. To hold on to God's promise instead of being paralyzed by fear. He understood that leadership is not the absence of fear, but the decision to trust in the one who is greater than fear. But the learning did not end there. The next chapter of this journey would bring an unexpected test. The day dawned golden over the plains near the Jordan. The sun reflected on the current, and the river looked even more threatening during the flood season. The waters rushed swiftly, foaming against the rocks. To anyone watching from afar, crossing seemed impossible. But as always, the impossible was precisely the stage where God would reveal his glory. Joshua rose early. His eyes scanned the camp where entire families stirred with expectation. Children clung tightly to their parents' hands, staring at the river with a mixture of fear and hope. The murmur of the crowd was like a sea of voices in motion, shifting between doubt and anticipation. That day Joshua carried no sword, nor did he draw up military strategies. His greatest weapon was faith. He had received a clear command from God. The priests were to carry the Ark of the Covenant, the symbol of divine presence, and when their feet touched the water, the river would part. It was a simple yet daring instruction. Who would dare believe that a raging river would open simply at the step of men bearing a sacred chest? Picture the scene. 4 priests robed in linen carrying the gold-covered ark upon their shoulders. Their hands trembled not from fatigue but from the awareness of what they were about to do. Every step was watched by thousands of eyes. Behind them all the people of Israel waited. Silence spread through the camp, broken only by the roar of the Jordan. Joshua remained firm. His gaze was not fixed on the turbulent waters but on the promise of God. This was the 4th secret of his leadership. An extraordinary leader leads by faith, not by force. He knew no human strategy could open the river, but the presence of God could, and then the priests took the first step. Their sandals touched the icy current. At that very moment, something supernatural happened. The waters stopped flowing. Upstream, the river began to pile up as if held back by an invisible hand. The waves ceased, the current halted, and before the eyes of Israel the Jordan opened. The people stood in awe. Children widened their eyes. Women covered their mouths with their hands. Men fell to their knees in reverence. The impossible had happened. The ground once covered by rushing waters was now dry, solid as a road. It was as if God himself had paved the way with his own hands. If this story is speaking to your heart, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next inspiring and moving accounts that bring lessons for our personal growth and for our entire lives. Now let us return to the scene. One by one, families began to cross. The sound of footsteps on the dry ground echoed like a hymn of victory. The priests stood firm in the middle of the river holding the ark until the last Israelite had crossed safely. It was a powerful picture. It was not the soldiers who sustained the people, but the presence of God at the center opening the way for all. As they walked, many remembered their parents telling stories about the Red Sea. Now they themselves lived a similar miracle. It was as if God were saying, "As I was with Moses, so I will be with Joshua. As I opened the sea, I will open the river." This secret of Joshua's leadership is a call to us today. Not to trust only in plans, resources, or strategies, but to place the presence of God at the center of our decisions. How many times do we face rivers that seem impossible to cross? Family crises, financial struggles, illnesses, personal challenges. The crossing only becomes possible when we learn to take the first step in faith. Joshua not only commanded the crossing, he also directed 12 men to take stones from the bed of the Jordan and set them up as a memorial. Each stone represented a tribe, a visible testimony that the impossible had happened there. It was a way to ensure that future generations would remember that God opens paths where none exist. Picture the scene. The stones being piled on the riverbank, the people watching in silence, children asking what that monument meant, and the parents responding, "It was here that the Lord made us cross. It was here that we learned He is faithful." Joshua understood that leadership was not only about guiding the people in the present, but also about preparing the faith of the future. He knew the human memory is short and that unbelief easily returns. That is why he left a marker, so no one would forget what they had seen. This is the 4th secret of his leadership: to guide in faith, not in force, and to teach others to remember that every victory comes from God. And here is a special invitation. If this story is already touching your heart, subscribe now to the channel. Write in the comments from which country you are watching. Let us build together a living memorial, a community that testifies to the power of God in our days. And share this video, because someone needs to be reminded that the Lord still opens impossible paths. When the last Israelite had crossed, and the priest stepped out of the riverbed, the waters returned with all their force. But forever engraved was the image of the people crossing on dry ground, with the ark at the center. It was the confirmation that Joshua did not lead by the sword but by faith. God is incredible and can do all things. They had already seen much, but nothing compared to what was about to happen. What came next would surprise everyone. The people of Israel had already crossed the Jordan. The miracle was still fresh in everyone's memory. But before them rose an even greater challenge. Jericho, a fortified city with thick, towering walls almost insurmountable. The stones, perfectly fitted together, seemed to cry out that no enemy had ever broken through. For the inhabitants of the city, those walls were their security. For Israel, they were an impossible obstacle. Picture the scene. From the tops of the watchtowers, Canaanite soldiers observed Israel's approach. Inside the city, families closed their doors and windows, fear written on their faces. Reports of God's miracles had already spread through the nations. The sea had parted, the Jordan had stopped flowing. Now Jericho trembled, but even with fearful hearts their walls still stood firm, like a challenge thrown against the army of God Joshua. The commander could have planned sieges, night raids, or tried to scale the walls with ropes and hooks, but it was at that moment that God gave him an entirely different command. March around the city once a day for 6 days. 7 priests shall carry trumpets before the ark. On the 7th day, march around the city 7 times and then shout with a great cry. It was a strange strategy, wasn't it? No general in all of history would have dared attempt such a thing. To march in silence day after day without attacking, without raising a weapon. With each lap, the soldiers could feel the mocking eyes of Jericho's guards. Perhaps they scoffed. Is this war or a parade? But Joshua did not question. He did not debate. He simply obeyed. This is the 5th secret of his leadership. An extraordinary leader obeys even when the command seems strange to human eyes. The first day was silent. The sound of footsteps echoed in the sand. The banner swayed in the wind, and the Ark of the Covenant moved at the center. All the people marched in silence without raising a sword. When they finished the circuit, they returned to camp. Nothing had happened. On the 2nd day, they did the same. On the 3rd, the 4th, the 5th, nothing changed. But the people were determined to obey the divine instructions and the guidance of Israel's new leader. Each morning his voice rang out among the tribes. Rise up. Follow the Lord's command. That silence was a test of faith. To march without seeing results is one of the hardest obediences. It is easy to obey when everything makes sense. The real challenge is to obey when nothing seems to happen. But Joshua understood that the power was not in the walls nor in the army, but in the word of God. The 7th day arrived. The sun rose crimson, gilding the stones of the city. The people rose with a mixture of nervousness and expectation. On that day the circuits would be 7. The heat grew with each lap around the walls. Soldiers felt sweat stream down their faces, yet they kept silent. The sound of trumpets pierced the air, announcing that something supernatural was about to happen. On the 7th lap, Joshua raised his hand. Silence was shattered by a mighty cry. Thousands of voices thundered together, like a storm bursting from the heart of the people. The ground shook. The walls trembled. And then, before all eyes, the stones that seemed immovable crumbled like sand. The impossible had happened. The city that trusted in its defenses fell without Israel lifting a single sword. The victory did not come from engines of war, but from obedience to a command that seemed absurd. This secret of Joshua challenges us today. How many times does God ask us to take steps that seem strange? To forgive someone who hurt us? To wait when we want to run? To love when the instinct is to retaliate? To trust when everything seems lost? To obey when we do not understand is to make room for God's power to be revealed. Israel never forgot that day. The children remembered the crash. The soldiers told how the walls fell before their eyes. The families held to the certainty that God fights for his people. And Joshua remained with the conviction that leadership is not about human strategy, but about submission to the voice of God. This is the 5th secret that made Joshua an extraordinary leader, to obey even when the instructions seem strange. He teaches us that victory does not come from the strength of our arms, but from faithfulness to God's word. God still challenges us today to obey and trust. What has been your greatest challenge lately? Why not place it in the Lord's hands and simply rest? But Joshua's mission did not end at Jericho. And the sixth secret would reveal his final decision. If you have followed this journey up to this point, you are already being prepared to live in an extraordinary way. Stay with me until the end, for there is a revelation that may change the way you see God's purpose for your life. Time had passed. Battles had been won, lands conquered, enemies defeated. The people of Israel were no longer the hesitant group that had left Egypt, but a nation established in the land God had promised. Yet Joshua knew something that few understood. The greatest threats did not come from the walls built by enemies, but from the silent altars of idolatry that lurked within hearts. Picture the scene. Joshua, already an old man, gathering the tribes at Shechem. The sun lit up the valleys and mountains around them, where centuries before Abraham had built an altar to the Lord. Now the same place became the stage for another decisive moment. Men, women, and children gathered. The sound of sandals pressing the dry ground, the waving of tribal banners, the murmur of families, all announced the solemnity of the occasion. Joshua stood before the people. His voice no longer had the same strength of youth, but it carried an authority born of experience and faithfulness. Each wrinkle on his face was a story. Each look reflected decades of walking with God. He did not speak as a general thirsty for victories, but as a father concerned for the future of his children. He began by reminding them. The victories were not Israel's merit. It was not the sharpness of swords nor the number of warriors, but the hand of God that had given them every city, every piece of land. It was the Lord who drove out the enemies before you, Joshua said. He wanted no one to forget that divine faithfulness was the reason they were alive. But then his voice grew stronger. He knew the human heart, knew how the idolatry of neighboring nations could seem attractive. He knew how easy it was for faith to grow cold when life became comfortable. So he made the appeal that would echo through centuries. Choose this day whom you will serve, whether the gods your ancestors served or the Lord. But as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. Silence fell over the crowd. Picture the glances crossing, fathers looking at sons, wives gazing at husbands. It was a decision that could not be pushed into tomorrow. Joshua knew that leadership was not only about conquering territories, but about inspiring the people to renew their commitment to God day after day. This is the sixth secret of his leadership. An extraordinary leader renews commitments constantly. He does not rest on past victories, does not lean on old memories. He calls for present faithfulness because he knows faith must be fed like the fire on an altar. Think of the courage of that moment. Joshua did not soften his words. He knew the people could choose wrongly, that many might already be divided in their hearts. Even so, he spoke clearly. He did not ask for lukewarm promises, but for definitive decisions. Such boldness comes from a leader who no longer seeks to please crowds, but to honor the God who called him. And the people responded. With one voice they promised, "We also will serve the Lord, for he is our God." It was a chorus that filled the valley, a renewed covenant before all. But Joshua, knowing the weakness of the human heart, was firm. You will not be able to serve the Lord if you are unfaithful. He is a holy and jealous God. He did not want shallow vows, but deeply rooted commitments. So that this covenant would be remembered, Joshua wrote the words in the book of the law of God and set up a large stone under the oak near the sanctuary. Picture that stone raised high, immense, silent, a mute witness to the decision of an entire people. It was as if it declared to future generations, "Here you promise to serve the Lord." This sixth secret is profoundly relevant today. How often do we also need to renew our vows? It is not enough to have had faith in the past, not enough to have witnessed miracles. True leadership is keeping alive the commitment to follow God every day, in every decision and every choice. Joshua shows us that spiritual life is made of constant renewal. Each morning is an invitation to say again, "As for me and my house, we will serve the Lord." Each challenge is a chance to reaffirm that we will not bow to other gods, whether power, money, or the invisible idols of the heart. And so, before the entire nation, Joshua concluded his appeal. His voice, marked by the weight of years, still rang strong. Do not live on past victories, renew your faithfulness today. This is the sixth secret that made him extraordinary. A true leader not only conquers, but calls for faithfulness every day. The people responded in unison, their promises echoing through the valleys of Shechem. The stone raised beneath the oak stood as a silent witness to that decision. But while everyone celebrated, there was a deeper truth hidden in Joshua's life. Something few had ever known. A mystery about to be revealed, and it would forever change the way his story would be remembered. Joshua no longer wielded the sword, nor led the people in battle. His face bore the wrinkles of decades. His eyes reflected stories of miracles and trials, and his voice, though weary, still carried authority and hope. Joshua had fulfilled his mission. He had led Israel into the promised land. But there was something in his life that few ever noticed. The greatest secret of Joshua was hidden in his very name. In Hebrew, Yehoshua means, "The Lord is salvation." Centuries later, that same name would be given to another, Jesus, in Hebrew, Yeshua. Just as Joshua led the people into the earthly Canaan, Jesus leads his people into the heavenly Canaan. The story of Joshua was not only about military victories, but a foreshadowing of something far greater, the work of the true deliverer. This is the seventh secret of Joshua's leadership. His life and his name pointed to Christ. Every battle won, every promise fulfilled, every act of courage was a shadow of the mission of Jesus, the only one able to lead us into the ultimate victory. Joshua opened the way for Israel to dwell in the promised land. Jesus opened the way for us to have access to eternal life. These seven secrets reveal that true leadership is not born of human power, but of dependence on God. Joshua was extraordinary not because he never felt fear, but because he chose to trust. Not because he was perfect, but because he knew how to obey. Not because he had strength in himself, but because he kept his eyes fixed on the Lord who saves. And for that reason, his story echoes through the centuries. And here is the invitation. Just as Joshua declared at Shechem, you too can decide today. As for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. This is the choice that truly transforms lives, families, and generations. Choose today whom you will serve and see God work in your life as well. If this message has touched your heart, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the upcoming videos. Leave your like and share it with those who are special to you. Write in the comments which of the seven secrets spoke most to you today. May the life of Joshua inspire us to follow the greatest leader of all, Jesus, the true and only Savior. Until the next video.